Hello and welcome to Apologetics 101. I am your host, Brian, your resident Christian apologist. I do apologize for not making a video in a while. It's been some weeks. I've had a lot of things going on. Just to kind of let everybody know, I don't do this full time. I don't make any money out of it or anything like that. I have a job and everything like that. So I do this part time, but I try to make as many videos as possible, as frequently as possible. But that won't always be every week. It depends on what's going on outside of YouTube. There's a lot of the things happening. Had doctor's appointments. I had one for my arm here. I don't have my brace on at the moment. I've got some arthritis going on in my joint there. So for all you Christians in the room, please pray for me. Thank you. I would appreciate it. And my wife had a doctor's appointment today, actually. Also, I had a flat. When I went to my doctor's appointment, then I had to fix my flat, and then I had to sit there get a tire. So it's been a lot going on outside of YouTube. I also been doing a lot of research. Now, this video is the next episode in the Tomkins Controversy. It is one I've been planning for a while. Um, Unmatched. It's dealing with the differences. Here recently, thanks to Glenn Williamson, actually, ironically, and I wound up getting. I've been wanting to get the blast at the command line. I've been able to do blast on the online version. That's why I've done all my blast analysis, which the way blast compares things, it's going to be the same regardless if you do the online version or the at the command line. But at the command line, you have more flexibility on your parameters, and I wanted that flexibility. Now, of course, blast compares things the same way. It doesn't compare something two different ways there. So the information on blast will still be accurate regardless, as well as the information on other algorithms and that sort of thing that I might not have been able to do at the command line, and that's fine. And I can still be able to set the node information about it. Glenn has raised some issues on that because he thought that if I didn't do blast myself in the command line, therefore I can't tell you anything accurate information about blast. That's incorrect. You can find out information on Blast Online, and you can still research the topic. Um, it's about like sitting there saying, hey, if you've never done a genetic study, you can't research anything about how we do genetic studies. That's silly. Of course you can. And so I still had the information I knew about Blast was still accurate regardless. But I always wanted to do Blast at the command line because it does, like I said, it does allow you more flexibility. I'm able to do more with that and be able to run some better experiments on that. And so Glenn, he really, really wanted me to get uh, the blast downloaded on my computer, the conventional blast, and do it at the command line, which you do it through the command prompt. Um, I have had trouble in the past trying to get it online on my computer. So he sends me the link, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna try, and I did, and I managed to get it on my computer. And I realized that I had to do it through command prompt. He helped me a little bit about the parameters, Glenn did, and I was able to sit there and use the parameters. He sent a Python script to me to use as well. That just kind of helped me be able to take out a kind of a chunk of it and do a blast analysis of it. Now, my point of doing it might have been different than what the the whole point of Glenn trying to do all this. Um, my point was to try to look into the differences that was not aligning, which is what we're going to be discussing today. That was my whole thing with the whole Tomkins controversy. It was just to to to, to be able to sit there and look into these differences that were not aligning, that did not align in a given study, and I actually devised a method I actually devised a method, which we're going to be talking here in a little bit, in order to look at the differences that were not aligning, and some interesting results came about as a result of that. Um, but before we go into that, let's cue the theme and let's jump right in. All right, we're back, and yeah, I did a series of experiments in Blast at the command line. I used a wide variety of parameters, and originally I didn't do the mismatch category. I added a mismatch category later when I realized what that is. I'll explain that here in a second. And that basically does, the differences in the basis within a given alignment. So my whole goal was to look at the differences that was not aligning in a given study. Um, Now I realize there's a whole entire regions of the tumor genome that does not align no matter what. And of course, there are some things that can align more in a given pass. So I'm not arguing that you can't do multiple studies until you get some of those uh, differences to align that wasn't aligning before. That wasn't the point that I'm making here. Well, rather instead, what I was trying to make here is to look at the differences that was not aligning in a given study. That means if I do a study and I get certain blast results, what differences are not aligning and how much do those differences impact the overall result? Okay. What I discovered essentially doing a series of experiments, this was very difficult. This was like I said, this was like way outside my area of expertise, and and it was hard. And I faced a lot of technological limitations. I will discuss those in a little bit, but I did face a lot of technological limitations. I had to revise my method several times. I had to go back to the drawing board because I kept making mistakes. It's too easy to make mistakes when you're working outside your area of expertise in this area. So I sat there and I was very conscientious about it. So, about the possibility of making mistakes because I didn't want to follow in Glenn and Erica's footsteps and make 10,000 mistakes and have it publicized for everybody to see. So I wanted to sit there and actually be able to look into these differences that were not aligning. Not do a full blown. I was not intending to do a full blown genetic study between comparison between human and chimps. I went a little bit further than what anticipated, and I ran into some technological limitations, and then I'll discuss those later. But I didn't want to sit there and like I said, make the same mistakes that they did. So I wasn't doing a full blown comparison. I would just wanted to know what was the impact that these differences make on the overall results. Okay. And in the process of doing that, I did devise a method by which to look into differences. I'm going to show you. I've got data pulled up, and I actually did it on Tompkins's data to see how much differences was not aligning, how much the impact they have on it. Before I get to that, let me explain some other stuff too. The impact to these differences only matter the higher, the more um, the more of a sample size you had. So the larger the sample size, the more impact these differences make, the more differences you had. And so if you do like a really small sample size, the differences are not going to matter that much. Usually you'll have like maybe 1 or 2 point percent difference, something like that. And it wouldn't matter that much if you had a really low sample size. But the bigger the sample size, the more differences it have. Now, my argument Now, essentially, I had a thesis at the beginning of this discussion, at the beginning of the whole controversy series. I think I talk about it in my very first video on the Tomkins Controversy as well. Essentially, my argument was that the more that if you these differences that did not align in given stuff, you take these differences that were not aligning and you import that back into your data, you increase your pool of data. But since most of this increase in your pool of data was coming from differences that was not aligning, then this would actually impact it. And the way this argument goes is there's a ratio between similarity and differences. The similarities will affect the differences, differences will impact the similarities. When people hear evolutionists say that chimps and humans are 98% similar or that they are 96% similar, the the automatic and natural response to that, or natural thinking to that, is to assume, oh, so humans and chimps must be 2 to 4% different. But in reality, they're far different than that. You could just like Dr. Lubinow had said in his book, um, uh, Bones of Contention, uh, commonsensically, you can tell there's something wrong with those numbers because humans and chimps are very different. They look very different from each other. They don't look the same. I am fixing to start an actual series soon, and I'm gonna talk about that later on, probably when I do my last episode of Tomkins Controversy. But on Are We Apes, and we're gonna actually look into that and stuff like that in a much more thorough manner on that, as far as chimps and humans differences and things like that. But um, humans and chimps obviously are far more different than 2 to 4%, and there's tons of differences that are being ignored by the algorithm. Also, when I added the mismatch category, if you actually look at the mismatch, we'll go there in a second, but if you look at the mismatch, there isn't a whole lot of differences within those alignments. Like, for example, in case of Tompkins alignment, the mismatch, which that's how I got the idea of using the mismatch category, because Tompkins had it in his data, and it's like if you do the sum totals, like over 5 million differences that did not align within the alignment. But when you look at the differences that did not align up at all outside of what was considered in the data, it's over 300 million. It's like, okay, that's a lot. That's over 300 million differences that did not align is a big deal than say over 5 million. So a small amount of differences are being counted in the similarities, only a small amount. And so the mismatch doesn't even affect. I added the mismatch in there just to include all the differences, including the differences that was being factored in to the percent identity. But in order to count all the differences, but the differences in the mismatch was minuscule compared to the differences outside of what was being matched up by Blast that 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 wasn't being matched up, that was different and that was not being considered. And so this the 96% and 98% numbers are artificial. They're artificial numbers. And this is what we've been trying to say since the beginning of this discussion. They are an artificial number. I know it's easy to promote it. And now, if you look at the p-ident score, the pi-dent score, the percent identity score, then what you end up having statistically, you have most of the alignments be in the high 90 percentile range. And that is absolutely true. And every experiment I did, these stats was true. Okay, most of them, the vast majority of them will be in the 90s, and most of those will be in the high 90s, and a handful will be in the 80s, and a smaller number would be in the 70s, where a rare few might be below 70%. That was the guess. Now, of course, I didn't do nowhere near the sample size, or wasn't able to. I did try to do some sample sizes that were that high and ran into some technological problems. Uh, but I wasn't able to do sample sizes as big as Tompkins. I did evaluate Tompkins's data though using my method, um, because he did do. I was able to do a sample size that big, and but so my method basically was trying to use the results of BLAST to be able to say, okay, let's do some basic math to figure out how how much basis, how much information is not is so is different that it's not registering in a given study. In other words, how much difference is not aligning in a given study, and then taking that um, difference and seeing how much impact did it make on the overall result. And what I got was that most of my examples were low sample sizes. I did try to get some higher sample sizes, 1,000 bases, 2,000 bases, 3,000 bases, that sort of thing. Um, and the higher the lower sample sizes, the differences did not make that much of a difference. The lower you got, because there was not that many differences that were there, and obviously their impact on the overall result examples would not be that much. Now, if you're wondering why does BLAST most of the experiments give you high 90 percentile results, the reason is because BLAST, like all the other algorithms, BLAST, NUCMIR, LASSI, whatever algorithm you're using, are looking for similarities. Okay, they're looking for sameness. They're looking for identical. But the more they match in a one-to-one search, the more it's going to align. Okay, that you could have some differences in alignment, but you're not going to have a lot of differences. If you had a lot of differences, it wouldn't align. The BLAST wouldn't program wouldn't match it up, and so that's the problem, right? It only looks for similarities with very little differences in it, but the differences would impact the overall percent similarity if you factor those differences back in. And so that's where the issue has. How many differences are being ignored by the algorithm in any given study? Again, it depends on your sample size, but the larger the sample size is, the more differences. One time in one of the studies, it jumped from, I saw in 500 bases, it jumped from like doubled. I think I went like 500 bases higher, and it doubled in size. It went from like 12,000 and something differences to over 24,000 differences in size, and just 500, just increasing the amount of information by 500 bases. Um, and the larger I use, the higher sequences, the more bases I included. The longer the sequences, the more differences started to get ignored by the algorithm. And at lower sample sizes, that it doesn't affect it that much. 1-2%. But the higher you went, the more it started to impact the overall results. When I checked Tompkins's results using this method, it impacted it significantly. I mean, in a big, big way. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But it actually impacted it in a big way. So this does mean, okay, what I discovered in this these experiments is that I validated a long-held thesis that I had made since the beginning of this controversy, that this would impact the results, and it turned out I was right. This did impact the results in significant ways. Now, if large enough sample sizes, which by the way, you have to use a large enough sample size in order to have a fair representation of chimp and human comparison. You cannot sit there and try to compare chimp and human comparison using 10. So the reason why we get most of them in the high 90s is because that's the job of the algorithm. It's looking for similarities. It's looking for sameness. It's looking for a comparison that matches up higher than other comparisons. And so it's not looking for differences at all. It's looking for similarities. Now it might counter some differences within an alignment, but not a lot. If it differed a lot, it wouldn't align at all. And this is universally recognized, by the way, by whether you're dealing with secular geneticists or whether you're dealing with Christian geneticists. It doesn't matter. They all agree on this. Carter agrees on this. Tompkins agrees on this. Richard Buggs agrees on this. They all agree. All the geneticists, if you look in there, and I've actually found a secular peer review paper when I was doing these experiments. I found a secular peer review paper where someone was talking about basis information that did not align between a human or it's a human and mice. I think it was human and mice was I think it was like 100,000 bases that did not align in the experiment that was unaligned and that they found, and it was in a peer review paper, and it was by a secular geneticist that was talking about it. You can find it on Google Scholar if you wanted to look into that. But interesting enough, there were other geneticists that talk about the regions of the genome that are not aligning between two different organisms that are being compared. Because these algorithms are looking for similarities, what they are not looking for are differences. So that's what I was interested in when I was doing these experiments. I wanted to know, okay, what are these differences? Are these differences, and how much these differences are going to impact the overall results? And I especially wanted to know about Tompkins' 2018 paper because I wanted to know why his data distribution was bimodal. And we'll get a little bit into that, and we're going to talk about that a lot more in the next episode of Tomkins Controversy. But I wanted to know why his data was bimodal. What was wonky about his data? What was going on with it? And I did discover some stuff along those ways, trying to answer that question. But in any case, let's go to Tompkins's experiment, and I can show you how my method works. All right, we're here in Tompkins's data here. You can see this is his CSV file, um, 18,000 contigs. It's actually 17,991 contigs. He rounded up to 18,000 in the title, and that's why everybody keeps saying 18,000. But he rounds it up to 18,000. But to be exact, it's actually 17,991. And anyway, so here's how my method worked. Equals now I would take the sum total of the query. The reason is because that's what's actually been submitted in BLAST. Say, for example, a query of 1,000 bases submitted to BLAST, but only 200 of them actually align. Then that would mean that the 800 of them, and I actually did check with Rob Carter and to make sure that this was accurate, that I was understanding that correctly. But 800 bases did not align, is what that would mean. 200 of them did align, but 800 didn't align. Now, the 200 that did align would still have some differences in the alignment, but the 800 that didn't align, I wanted to be able to include that among the differences that were not aligning. So you take the sum total of the query length, and then you subtract it by the sum total of the length. Okay, but I didn't want to stop there. As you notice, these p-ident is not in 100% range. That's because there are some differences in the alignment that included. This is what the mismatch category is for. Tompkins data already had the mismatch category, and so that what got prompted me into include that. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to show you how much difference is that compared to the actual differences they're not aligning. So add it. So add it to sum total in the mismatch category. Okay, and that will give me 372,417,858 differences. This number right here is what that would give me. Okay. Now, by the way, I did use the conventional weighted score. How you weight it? Erica kind of weighted it a little differently. I don't know why she did it that way, but the way you're supposed to weight it in the way you're supposed to weight it in Excel, you're supposed to use a feature called sum product. Okay, and use the if you're weighting it by the length here, use the p-ident and comma length, and then what you want to do is you want to divide that by the sum total of the length, and that gives you the weighted value, this right here. Okay, that's how you come up with the weighted value. So to satisfy the critics, I did use the weighted value here, and then I got the unmatched regions, and it came to a total of 66%. What does that mean? It doesn't actually mean that, it means that there's a 66% of Tompkins's data did not align, is what that means. Now, what is that the overall score? Well, if you take 66%, you take this score, I get this thing to work right. Okay, take this, we're going to take this right here, to 96%, and we're going to subtract this. This is how many differences that are not aligning. And it gives you like 29%. You say, wait a minute, that doesn't even sound realistic. That's what I said. It don't sound realistic because we know chimps and humans are at least similar. Um, uh, even the issue is how similar they are. So what's going on with that? I asked the same question. So I thought I wanted to sit there and try to download some of these contigs and figure out what was going on. So I asked Glenn. I sent Glenn another email asking for the link, and he sends me the link. But with that, he actually gives me this little bombshell that there's actually more contigs that were available on the NCBI's website. Over 72,000. What? Over 72,000. Tomkins used 18,000 of those contigs, which is 25% of the overall available number. I did check on this. It is true. And there was over 72,000 on there. Now, Tomkins was trying to use a large enough sample size. I don't know whether he accomplished that or not accomplished that. It's only 25% of the overall result. I'll let you be the judge of that. I'm not a geneticist, so I don't know. That could be good enough for a genetic study. Now, Tomkins, of course, was not looking at the differences that wasn't aligning. I'm looking at the differences that wasn't aligning. So that's my study. The nature of my study is actually different from Tomkins, because Tomkins was not looking at these differences online. Originally, I thought he was looking at that. He knew about them, and he talked about them in his papers and interviews, but he did not actually bother to actually look into them, and he told me this himself. So that was not the nature of his study. My nature, however, was looking at the differences. When I realized that this was giving me real unrealistic numbers, and I realized that Tompkins did not include all of these contents. Now, of course, in his research, he didn't have to, but in his method. But in my method, I need to know, because remember, I was comparing differences and similarities, and it was a ratio. The similarities are going to impact the differences are going to impact the similarities. So I downloaded all 72,000 of these contigs, intending to blast them. And then I ran into all sorts of technological limitations, including limitations on memory. And you know, the funny thing is, it brought back my memory of me me and Tompkins talk about this, that on the kind of equipment that we're using to do these analysis. And Erica scoffed at this and laughed at this and hand waved this away. And it's like, oh, well, that just affects the speed. No, it also affects the efficiency. I'm not set up to do these kinds of experiments. I tried two different computers to do them and ran into all kinds of memory issues and things like that. It's not just about speed, it's also about efficiency. I couldn't do the kind of sample sizes that Tompkins was able to do in these results. I could only do a limited amount of sample size. I tried to get as large as I could possibly get within, my technological limitations. Eventually, I decided these contexts were weird. My program shut down several times. I kept freezing up over here, so I moved the experiment on this computer over here on the left side of me, and and it kept shutting me, kicking me out of the program and everything else. So eventually, I just gave up. I did it. I tried several different times, but I knew it was a point. I knew it was a pointless experiment when I first started because I just don't. I'm just not set up to do these kinds of experiments. What this experiment did, it showed that the differences did impact the similarities, and the similarities do impact the differences. Now, if I had done the experiment, what would I expected? Well, I wouldn't expect it over half of Tompkins's. This right here, if you notice, it's over half of the quarry. It's over half. I wouldn't expect that. The reason why I got that is because I think it's because I didn't have all the information of that. Because Tompkins only included the first 18,000 of those 72,000 contigs that were available on NCBI's website. And so that's only like 25% of the overall amount that was available. And so that's why I think I'm getting unrealistic numbers. And so, but it did show me that the impact for these similarities and differences do impact one another. And it's not just the differences impacting the similarities. Similarities impact the differences as well. Um, but I think I would, if I was able to do all 72,000 contigs, I think it ultimately would give me the results that Richard Buggs had, somewhere in the low 80s. I think it's what it would end up giving me. Um, and so, because Richard Buggs used Pancho 6, and these contigs are based off of Pancho 6. And also, I was using HG38 for my sequencing because I was having trouble with the T2T. And so I was using that, and Richard Buggs also was using HG38 when he did when he was looking into these experiments, and so Pancho 6 and HG38, and he came up with like 84.38%. So I think if I was able to do that, I think I would probably end up where Richard Buggs had ended up. That's where I believe I would have done. But the point of these experiments, though, was to show that the impact of the similarities and differences have were significant the bigger the sample size you went. The larger the sample size, the more of an impact that these had. And the interesting thing is, I also found out that over half of Tompkins's data was not aligning. Now, again, am I infallible on this? No, this is way outside my area of expertise. But I was interested in knowing what, curious about it, knowing what differences was not aligning and how much impact those differences would make in the overall result. As we get closer and closer to the end of the Tomkins controversy, I want everybody to keep in mind that the similarities that people come up with, 96 to 90% similarity, is an artificial number. That's not real. It ignores a tremendous amount of differences. All right, there's something else I wanted to show you here. If we look at just the mismatch category over here, right here, the sum total of that only, see, it's just over 5 million. It's like 5,035,340. So just over 5 million. Now, if we were to look at the differences minus the mismatch category, See, okay, over 3 million differences, over or 300 million differences, 367 million and 382,518 differences, and that's minus the mismatch. The mismatch only had about a little over 5 million differences. That's a lot of differences that are being ignored by the algorithm. A lot. So it's not. This is significant because there's only very little differences that are actually being contrasted there. So as we moved toward the end, I just want everyone to kind of know that 96 to 98% similarity. These are artificial numbers. They make people think, oh, there's only 2 to 4% difference between humans and chimps. That is false. There's actually far more differences between humans and chimps. I'm not entirely certain how different. I would have to go like the way Tompkins himself said he would go with Richard Bugs' study because it's probably the most comprehensive in terms of looking at these differences and similarities. And he saw that it was 84.38% similar between humans and chimps. That's still similar. That still means humans and chimps are similar. So nobody's arguing against their similarity. Rather, we're saying that it's not quite as similar as a lot of evolutionists believe them to be. What is my position on Tompkins' study? That's something that some people have been wanting to know. My position is simply this: I side with Dr. Rob Carter um, from CMI, Creation Ministries International. I side with him on the subject matter. I do not side with Erica, nor do I side with Glenn. Um, Maybe me and Glenn will have some agreements, but then most part we probably disagree. Me and Erica disagree quite much, a lot. Um, I agree methodologically with Tompkins in terms of the way Tompkins did it using large sample sizes. Now, I question whether or not if the 18,000 contigs was a large enough sample size, even according to Tompkins' own method. And I question whether that would be enough. But I am not a geneticist, so I could be wrong. That could be plenty, as far as I know. I'm not that familiar as much as terms of how much is enough for, see my bunny ears, enough for uh, for it to be considered a viable sample size between humans and chimps. Um, Maybe Tompkins would know more if that's the case. I don't know. But as just an outsider, just looking into this, it does look like 18,000, which is only 25% of 72,000, might not be enough. I don't know. Um, but methodologically, I sided with uh, him on this. Carter tries to take a kind of a top down approach to it. Try to say, I'm going to give the critics the numbers that they want, start there, and then I'm going to work away from there. Um, but he's not really saying that they're right. He actually doesn't think they're right. He thinks they're wrong. But the point is that if that's the maximum that you can come up with, then whatever the true percent similarity would be less because the algorithms involved um, do look for similarities or sameness, and so the differences are being ignored, especially large scale differences, and um, and once you factor these differences back in, this would drop the percent similarity. So logically speaking, whatever it is, it's less than what evolutionists think it is. So that's obvious. Now I agree with Dr. Carter on that. But what I'm saying is that methodologically in practice, uh, geneticists do normally work up, and not down like that. Um, but I understand from his perspective why he did that. So I don't think that either of them are necessarily wrong in terms of how they're doing it. It's just that obviously it's not normally done that way, but it that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. And so, but I usually just go with what usually gets done in terms of the way they do things. And so I'm usually with Tompkins on the methodology, but I do agree with what Dr. Rob Carter said concerning Tompkins's 2018 paper, because Tompkins said that, or Carter said that in accordance with Tompkins' 2018 paper, that he questioned whether it was a fair representation of the champion human genome. And I'm beginning to question that as well, because I'm wondering if it's a fair representation of it. And so I just kind of lean toward Rob Carter's position. This doesn't mean I lean toward Erica. Erica kind of made an oversimplification fallacy in her video. Well, he disagrees with Tompkins' method, therefore he agrees with me. No, he disagrees with your method too. And in fact, he actually disagrees with how you're doing it, and as well as the conclusion you raise, because he thinks it's actually less than what you think it is. So, so he didn't agree with Erica. Like I said, the idea of having a popular level creationist agree with her appealed to her, but it's not very honest. She was making the oversimplification fallacy there, where she was oversimplifying it. If he disagrees with Tompkins' method, therefore he agrees with her. That's not the case. So, like Carter, I disagree with Erica, but I do agree with what Rob Carter said on Tompkins' 2018 paper. At least thus far, I can't really go any further because of my technological limitations. Um, so simply, my position is that these similarities and differences do impact one another. They the If you factor in the differences, this increases your pool of data, and since most of your pool of data is coming from differences, this will drop your percent similarity in significant ways, and that's why Richard Bugs got an 84.38%. That's why everyone else that's getting this, looking into it, seems to be, getting that results a lot less. Uh, Now I'm looking into whether or not, if my method is. I'm not saying my method is foolproof. I don't think it is. There might be flaws in my method, and I'm going to be looking into those flaws and checking things out and seeing whether or not if there's a better way to do it than the way I'm doing it. Um, there was something else I was looking into, but I was too afraid that I made a mistake there, and I just kind of backed out of it. See, I second guessed myself a lot, and that's what happened a lot during this time. I was second guessing myself, questioning it. I questioned every step I did in this experiment, which is more than what I say for Glenn or Erica, because I don't think Glenn and Erica question themselves until after they find out they made a mistake. Then they question it. With me, I questioned it before I made this. Before I made the step, during the time I made the step, after I made the step, even after I made the results, I was questioning it. Sometimes I find out that I was questioning it and I was originally right, and I end up having to in editing, I had to put a note in there to let you know, because I actually questioned myself at the last minute, and changed the math and how I was doing this, and then suddenly I find out, oh, wait a minute, I was originally right. I just messed up here and got confused, and started questioning it and second guessing everything. So sometimes I find out I was originally right, and my second guessing just kind of got in the way of that. But the point is that I did second guess myself every step of the way, which I don't think Erica nor Glenn really did very well. They just kind of confidently moved forward, thinking that they had the right idea, and turns out they did not. And so, but anyway, I didn't want to make the same mistake, so I questioned everything, and even now I still question stuff that I did. So it's probably not going to be. This is not going to be the end of all ends. There's obviously more work to be done on that. I just, out of curiosity, I did want to kind of look at the differences that were not aligning and see the kind of impact they were having. And that's the main thing I wanted to get out of the experiment. I knew that I would probably make 10,000 mistakes because this is just not my area of expertise. I don't have no experience doing all this. And so I questioned everything and second guessed myself from, one day to the next, from 1 minute to the next. Um, but I do think that these differences and similarities do impact one another, and so I think it's a ratio between the similarities and dissimilarities. The idea of, well, it's 96% similar, therefore, well, there's only 4% similar. You can just look at our differences, just look at ourselves and look at a chimp, and it's like, that this is not the case. We know that this is not uh, that we know this is not the truth of the matter, and you can just tell it. It's just commonsensical. Even if you knew nothing about genetics, you could tell that just by thinking about it. Just thinking of an image of chimp in your head, and then looking at yourself and ask yourself, is there only 2 to 4% difference between you and a chimp? If there is, God, I feel for you. I feel for you. But I doubt that that's the case. I really do. So, but anyway, I wanted to add that in, just kind of let people know what exactly is my position. I was kind of in a rush to do the video because I am trying to hurry up and get the series over with. I do have another series that I'm also going to be making. Ironically, it's called Are We Apes? And that's going to replace the Tomkins Controversy series, and I can't wait for it. It's also another spin off series from my Genesis series, so it's going to be cool. I'm going to have some cool guests on here, some cool interviews during that course of discussion in that particular series. So yeah, I can't wait. And so I did do some of these experiments in Blast. I had a well, sorry for the pun, but I had a blast. It was fun doing these experiments, but this is just way outside my expertise, and I was so scared of making mistakes, and I'm just tiptoeing, just like I'm walking on glass, and worried that I'm gonna make a single sound or something, and and I didn't want to make mistakes like Erica did, like Glenn did. But I was very careful. I'm asking relevant experts to, you know, questions, and I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm trying to, fumble through the dark, as it was. But the main thing I wanted to see here uh, was, were there differences that are not aligning, and how much do they impact the difference? How much do they impact the results, the similarities, and the differences? And especially in Tompkins's 2018 study, and what what would the what impact would it have the larger sample size you go? Because that's what we're dealing with Tompkins studies. We're dealing with much, and all genetic studies really, a large sample size. Would the differences matter or be impactful on the overall results? And I say yes, they would be. Um, Now, I wish I was able to do all 72,000 contigs there, and be able to sit there and blast all 72,000. I would have loved to know what the true similarity and differences between those contigs really were. Um, I have a feeling they're going to fall somewhere in the 80s, probably similar to what Richard Bugs came up with, because they were based on Pantol 6, and I was using HD38 as well, and that sort of thing. So I have a feeling that that's where they would have failed, but I won't know because I'm just not set up to do these kinds of experiments. But I did make some attempts at doing that experiment. It took me a long time. I must have been doing this for the last couple of months. That's why you haven't seen a Tompkins Controversy episode for a while, because I've been doing these experiments, and I really wanted to look into this issue. Um, Unfortunately, I did hit a lot of brick walls. I hit technological brick walls. I hit brick walls in terms of my knowledge and expertise on the matter, and so this has been difficult to try to wrestle with. And of course, I'm not um, uh, advanced on math, but I can do some basic math, and I did use a percent calculator to calculate the percentage. That's how I came up with the percentages. I used the an online percent calculator, and that sort of thing. Now, I'm sure there's a mathematical way to do that, but I'm not like a very big math whiz or whatnot. I can do basic math. Sometimes people pounce on that and they say, "Oh, well, you can't do basic math." I can add 2 plus 2, okay? Come on now, dudes. I can do basic math. Not being good at math doesn't mean I can't do basic math. I live in the United States. They got that drilled into us how to do basic math, but I'm just not advanced on it because it's just not my aptitude. You know what I'm saying? And so as a result, I did use some online sources to try to figure out some of the math there. But it was pretty cool to do these experiments. I'm glad I did them. It'd be kind of shame to finish off the Tomkins controversy and never had done these experiments. But there are differences and similarities. There's tremendous amount of differences and similarities. They're there. Is my method perfect? I don't know. I would have loved to have been able to validate that with Tompkins's study, but unfortunately, it didn't include all of the context. And I have a feeling there's a lot more similarities and differences that are there in those contexts. Because I mean, Tompkins has only included like about 25%, actually a little less than 25%. Because the actual context that was available on NCBI's website was actually like over 72,700 and something. I don't remember the exact number, but I remember that it showed the download. It also showed what sequences I added when I did the Python script. So I was able to see the exact result of the NCBI's context. So it's actually less than 25% of it. And I can honestly see these contexts are weird. I can honestly see why his data distribution ended up going to a bimodal distribution. We're going to talk about more of that in the next episode of Tomkins Controversy 2 on weighted versus unweighted. We're going to be looking at his data distribution, and we're going to talk about bimodal data, statistics, and things like that. And that video is going to be shorter than I originally intended to be because I was going to have some conversation about the unalignable regions of the genome and stuff like that. But that's what this video is for. So, I'm talking about the differences they're not aligning, as well as differences in the chimp and chimp and human genome that I can't look at without going into the genome to look. But there are regions of the genome between humans and chimp that cannot align at all because they're so different, and that's not going to be included in the blast results. So there's that as well. But in order to know that, you'd have to go into the chimp and human genomes and begin making comparisons and looking at that yourself. You can't do it using BLAST algorithm or any of these algorithms because they're designed to look for similarities, for sameness in the genomes, and so you would get, like I said, most of my results are going to be in the high 90s, of course, and a handful of 80s and things like that. And I think the reason that Tompkins got the number he got was because he averaged it out. I don't think averaging it out was the best approach either. Um, but really and truthfully, my position in this is that everybody, regardless whether it's me, whether it's Glenn, Erica, Tompkins, Carter, whoever, if you're going to make these kinds of genetic comparisons, you need to look in the differences that go on. According to what Tompkins told me in the email, he did not do that in his study, and that was not the goal of his study. And I realized that, but I think that it should be the goal of everyone that's looking into these because there are all differences that are not aligning, and they do impact the overall results. Now, if you're using a small enough sample size, they wouldn't, but no geneticist making genetic comparisons between human and chimp are going to use small sample sizes. The chimps and human genomes each is about 3 billion, 3 billion bases long. So you're going to need a large sample sizes. They're going to be in the tens of thousands. And as a result, the differences that are not aligned will impact the overall result. And so I think that everybody who does these kinds of experiments should look into what differences are not aligning and how much impact they have on your overall results. That's one of the reasons why I developed my method this way. Um, I'm not sure what would become of it. I wish I was set up to do these kinds of experiments. That way I can validate my method and prove that whether my method, is my method flawed? Is it a sound way of doing this? And of course, even then, there's still differences that are not going to be included in the blast results at all. That I'm not going to be able to get to without looking directly into the genome in order to get those differences too. So it might not be a perfect methodology here, but in a given study, it helps try to get a a grasp on what is not aligning versus what actually is aligning, and how much impact these are making on each other. And so I believe it's a similarity and dissimilarity ratio. It's not that we look at one side and see the similarities, but we also look at the other side and see the differences as well. And the similarities are going to impact the differences, and the differences are going to impact the similarities. And so it's kind of a ratio between those two. Um, so when someone says that chimps and humans are 96 to 98% similar, people get the impression that chimps and humans are only 2 to 4% different, when in reality, we are far more different than that. I hope to give you the weighted versus unweighted pretty soon. It's going to be a short video because I do want to try to end this discussion. I am planning on doing I think I'm going to try to see if I can do a live showing of the last episode of the Tomkins Controversy, where I kind of summarize everything, every development that happened, and discuss it with people. And if someone has questions to ask, and that sort of thing. Let me know in the comments if you think a live showing of the Tomkins Controversy would be a good idea for the last episode, and I would appreciate your feedback on that. All right, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'm hoping to end this series very soon because I got a new series that I want to start. I've got some upcoming interviews in the month of August coming up, and so I'm wanting to try to see if I can get this series ended pretty soon, pretty quickly. So let me know what you think in the comments, and this is Apologetics 101 signing off, saying stay in the know.